Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 9 of Bungo Stray Dogs Season 4. Yeah. Last episode was pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. Dazai and Fyodor at a battle of wits now that they're in this prison together. Atsushi and Kyoka are seemingly on their own, but they've tried to track down Fitzgerald and see if the guild will help them. And they supposedly are making a deal with Mori to get the ADA members. Mori wants Yosano to work for the Port Mafia because of her ability. He's lied to her, saying the president is going to give her away when we know that's not true. It's just, Rompo's nowhere to be seen. It's a bunch of craziness, right? And I'm going to be honest, I've been sadly coming down with a cold the last few days, and I'm like, again? Really? So I'm guzzling tea and drinking lots of water, and I will probably rest after this, but I was like, I can't wait because I'm supposed to go out of town this weekend. So I'm like willing myself to be like, no, it's Bungo Stray Dogs. No rest for the wicked, right? So I've also got lots of comments to talk about from episodes 7 and 8 that we need to talk about. And I also have a piece of artwork to share with you. Scarlet Camilla was over on Twitter and sent me this piece of artwork that was seemingly sent out that's like a new official artwork detailing their beautiful fashion. And I will say, some anime have a hard time doing like casual fashion. Not Bungo Stray Dogs, because look at these dapper gentlemen. Look at them. Look at them. I love Dazai. He has his bolo like he does, but he has this like blue suit on. I like the blue on Dazai with the black trim and the gray undershirt. It's very, very pretty. The gray undershirt's very fitting for his character to be like this morally gray figure. I love Atsushi with the gray suit, and he has the yellow suspenders and the yellow socks, but I like the little tiger, like little chain that's coming off of his pants. It's super cute, and he has the suspenders like he usually does. It's absolutely adorable. But look at Octagawa. Octagawa and Gin are like best dressed siblings no matter what. Octagawa with this beautiful over the shoulder coat, the red gloves, and this beautiful like ornate detail on this like shirt. It's like a collar of this button up shirt. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then the big gaucho style pants. Very traditional, very nice. And then Chuya has to have the skinny pants. He wears a skinny leg, our king of sheep. But I love the red inlay in his jacket. Of course, it's opposite Dazai. Dazai has blue, Chuya has red, has his trademark fedora, and he's such a little guy. Chuya's so little. It's so cute, though. I absolutely think that this fashion suits all of them so well. It's very, very handsome. I like it a lot. So I'm like, mwah, chef's kiss all around. I'm all for that. But we got a couple comments to get through before we start this episode. Dana was talking about in the Discord after episode 8 that Ongo would have a lot of resentment against the government, kind of the president's views about the whole thing with the system of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. We talked about that in the last episode. And Ongo, as Dana points out, has had to write death reports for all of these individuals that have died because of actions taken by gifted authorities and gifted organizations. So, of course, he kind of values the life of the individual because he's had to write the death reports for them. So that's a really cool tie-in, and I had forgotten about that, so I'm glad you brought it up. Alessi Colley, I guess in the discussion I noted where they were at, and it is, Alessi Colley pointed out if you go back into the episode and re-listen, it does say that they are in a European detention center. Don't know where in Europe, don't want to know where. Is it tied to the clock towers? Don't want to know. We'll find out when we do, right? But that's all I want to know, so that is good to point that out. Dark Moon B had a really cool comment saying that maybe Juno didn't hear the helicopter because they could have thought it was, we were speculating like how did Juno and Tensho not hear the helicopter that Chuya was on coming. And Dark Moon B had a very practical explanation, and that was that it could be that they thought maybe the helicopter was military flying around, so they didn't think twice about it. But also I like the idea that Juno was so convinced no one would come to save the ADA. It was written in the book, so what could challenge that? So I kind of like that unexpected factor, and they kind of got cocky, and that contributed to it. I thought that was neat. And also, Dark Moon B, along with several others, noted that Atsushi's dream, in it, the headmaster has been replaced by Dazai. And Dazai, whereas the headmaster was kind of this source of trauma for Atsushi whenever he had flashbacks, now Dazai is a source of hope and positivity. And I was like, yes, I love that. That's such a big thing for Atsushi's character, right? To be replaced for one thing that brings such negative energy, to be replaced with something that does the opposite. That's huge, right? So I thought that was really cool to point out. Velvety Yuri noted that, and several others, I think non-binary Jitlung noted this as well, that the hunting dog uniforms originally were green, but there was a little bit of controversy with it in that it was drawing too heavily on militaristic uniforms during World War II, so it was decided to make them red instead. I can see the cultural connotation. It's so bizarre to me that World War II was nearly 80 years ago, and yet we're still kind of like, I don't want to talk about it. So it's very interesting culturally, and I understand the whys, definitely, but I think that's fascinating that was a decision made in this series. Interesting. K.A. noted that Fukauchi's VA is actually the same as Shunsui from Bleach, as well as Dimple Sama from Mob Psycho. And I was like, oh, Dimple! Dimple's VA is the man with the lion moon ability. That's kind of cool. Now that I think about it, when I listen to his voice, I'm like, no, that does sound like Dimple. That's pretty cool. But we also have other Bleach VAs in this series, because Techo, this kind of blew me away, that Techo's voice actor, the one with the sword that extends, his voice actor was not only Charlotte from Bleach, which is like this big masculine kind of over-the-top crazy character, but is also Otoguro from Tsurune. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I guess they are kind of like both kind of himbo characters, so maybe they're not so different, but I thought that was really, really cool. And then there was a YouTube commenter, again, their name is in Japanese, I don't know what it is, but they said in real life, Kinji, who is our dear farm boy ADA member, in real life, Kinji actually taught at an agricultural school, and he was persuaded by his grandfather to rent and grow an orchard while he was teaching. And now in his hometown, there's actually a pear orchard, and they have a festival every year surrounding it. So I was like, well, that's kind of cool that we connect back to the real life author. Again, that's pretty neat. I liked that a lot. Non-binary Jitlung talked about Yosano's ability, Thou Shall Not Die, is actually an anti-war anthem that has been used. The poem has been. I was like, that's pretty badass and cool. I like that. I like that with her character. I want to know more about her character and her past with Mori. I need to know these things, but maybe we'll get that this season, maybe not. And it's interesting how the ADA is targeted by government agencies, and the people that are in real life, the authors that the ADA characters kind of make up, were kind of actually anti-war, anti-authority figures in their writing. So it all kind of adds up. It's a nice little connection there between them all. I thought that's really neat. And then finally, Sarah Linda, we were talking in the comments. I've been wondering about Futon Man. Like, where has he been this whole time? What's been going on with him? We last saw him with Natsumi. We haven't seen Natsumi at all. So Sarah Linda was commenting, wondering if, and they have not read the manga, so they're as in the dark as I am, wondering if maybe Futon Man is the one that programmed the warning to Kyoka. That would make sense. He's good with tech. So, but maybe he's how Dazai is making contact with people. However that works, I don't know. But along the same lines as Dazai, I liked Sarah Linda's comment about how on the surface, you have Dazai and Fyodor, who seem to be very near each other in level. Although I would agree with Sarah Linda that Fyodor might be a little bit smarter than Dazai. Fyodor might be a little bit more clever than Dazai. But the thing that Dazai has over Fyodor is so obsessed with this idea of eradicating the gifted. He gets maybe a little bit narrow tunnel visioned, a little bit. And maybe he cannot understand that Dazai, because of his relationship with Otasaku, has a little bit of empathy and strives to help people that are trying to better themselves. And Fyodor just cannot understand that concept. So even though Fyodor might be a little bit smarter, he might be lacking a little bit in that empathy and that character study that Dazai knows a little bit better. So the fact that these two nut jobs are next to each other in a prison cell is, we were talking in the Discord, they're like, where do they go to the bathroom at? I was like, we don't talk about that. That's going to be in season 2 of Bungo Stray Dogs 1. I still want Chibi Lovecraft. I need that in my life. So yeah, I really liked those comments, everybody. So thank you all so much. I I'm guzzling down tea. I took some cold medicine this morning. It was kind of loopy, and I've not retaken it yet because I was like, I don't need to be loopy for this episode. But I will probably, after we're done with the discussion, get some sleep. But that, not now, though. We got an episode to watch. So I've talked for 10 minutes. We're wasting time. We're going to start episode 9 of Bungo Stray Dogs season 4 and see what's going to happen next. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. Oh my gosh, this episode was so good. I wanted backstory. We got backstory, and it was as dark as you can imagine. Oh my god. Oh, the angel of death on the medic, the war medic. Yeah. So it makes sense now why her power would be feared, right? Because she technically kept bringing back those soldiers over and over and over again. Oh my god. It's stuff like this, right, that makes me really happy. Because I feel like the mangaka has had these backstories in their heads all along. But if you couldn't have told Yosano's backstory in seasons 1 through 3. I don't think you could have, because the season hadn't committed to that seinen just craziness and darkness like it has in this season. If you had told Yosano's backstory back in season 1, it would have seemed so dark and out of place with the fun, campy ADA adventures that you needed to wait until this point where things were like, oh no, this is really bad, to get to the point of just how serious her ability is and how seriously it could be taken advantage of. And so I feel like the mangaka has always wanted to tell Yosano's backstory, but was like, okay, we'll just wait. And I'm still impressed. I am impressed. This may be the best season of this show ever. And I'm like, it's rare for an anime in the 4th season to be like at its best. And I'm like, wow. But I feel like the mangaka has taken all this time to set everything up and be like, no, just wait. Now that we've got it all set up, now we can just let this flourish. And it's like this beautiful dark black rose that's blooming. And it's amazing. We still don't have Octagawa. He's in the OP. We've only got 10, 11, 12, 13. We got 4 episodes left. He's got to show up at some point, right? I'd imagine he's going to show up in the next episode because we're going to have this transaction. If Atsushi's there, Octagawa is not far behind, right? Or I feel as if someone from the hunting dogs is going to try to attack Atsushi, and Octagawa will protect him for some tsundere reason. He'll be like, he won't admit that he's protecting Atsushi to protect Atsushi. He'll be like, oh no, it's because we have to have a duel on our own terms at some point. I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay, Octagawa. Sure thing. But yeah, man. Oh, Yosano. 11 years old. 11. We just keep going backwards in time. We've gone like 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 12 years, and now we go back 14 years to establish this timeline that is very, very interesting, right? Very interesting in this big old timeline here. But yeah, so I did notice this. I didn't note this in the comments, but I was talking to somebody about the arc, the light novel being adapted for the first arc of season 5, and I mentioned Stormbringer, and somebody in the comments was like, I hope it's not Stormbringer because there's too much happening in that novel. It would need to be more than 3 or 4 episodes. And I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe it's, I don't know, a movie or something. I don't know what they'll do with it. But that's interesting. I still think they might adapt it, but I don't know for sure. I'm very happy, though, that this season, it's such a reward for us, the viewers, because that whole light novel about Rampo and Fukuzawa getting adapted at the beginning, it just keeps coming back for more. The whole thing with Yosano and Rampo at the end, I was like, that again, we needed to see that flashback with Rampo and Fukuzawa to get Rampo's character to have those extra layers so that when he has that beautiful moment with Yosano at the end, where Rampo's like, I don't care about your ability. Mine's the only one that counts. Like, I just want you to be nice. Like, that giving her a place to belong, that was beautiful. And it would have seemed so out of place in seasons 1 through 3, because in those seasons, we don't know Rampo's backstory yet. So his character isn't as fleshed out for us. It would have seemed kind of out of character, but now it does not, because we know his backstory. We know that the whole detective front it's not really a facade. He is a troll and he is a kid at heart, but there's more to it than that, right? So Just Bungo Stray Dogs. Oh my god. This episode was so dark. I think my jaw was on the floor for most of it, being like, we're really going there. And that, oh my god, it was so good. So, we talk real quick about Fitzgerald. Because Mori, man, we talked about this in the Discord. Mori has been one of my favorite characters in this whole series because he's so dark and twisted, but yet there's like a weird charm to him. He has not been charming in this season at all. And I'm sure some people will argue he's never been charming ever, but there's been parts where I've been like, oh yeah, no, he's charming. See, him and Fukazawa flirting. No, this season is really out to make Mori look as disgusting as possible and succeeding rather well, right? By having him lying. The moment we found out she was 11 and Mori's like, oh my Yosano, I was like, I wanted to throw up my mouth. And if I wasn't so congested and like half sick, I would have been like, bleh. But yeah. I'm like, oh my god, yeah, him just being like, my Yosano, and you're my... It's just like, that fetish with girls, right? I'm just like, just need to get it out of here. Leave. So, we talk real quick about Fitzgerald. Just like make a little side note here about about Fitzgerald, and is this actually a trap? I'm gonna say no! I really am, and I said this in the reaction... I'm going to say no, only because, yeah, I mean, Mori is correct that Fitzgerald is not going to be on the losing side. He wants to be on the winning side. But Fitzgerald knows Atsushi. He knows Akutagawa and the others enough. He knows the ADA. He knows Dazai. I think that there's a chance that, the phrase is fortune favors the bold. I think there's a chance that Fitzgerald will be like, you know what? If I turn you all in... Who's to say that we're not next? Like, Fyodor may turn on the guild next. He may come after us. And then we'll need your help, and you all will be captured, so it won't work out, right? And so he's like, I feel like Fitzgerald, in that moment, is thinking, well, I may need to use the ADA later for my own benefit, so why not I scratch their back now and make them scratch my back when it counts? Or, if he gets any inkling that the book is involved, he's going to be like, hey, Atsushi, remember when I helped you and your little friends? Now you're going to help me get the book, right? Because he asked them to get it before him, or he said he wanted it before back in season 2, so... Yeah, I feel like Fitzgerald is actually going to try to help the ADA because he's going to want them to help him in return later on. I could be wrong. Maybe Mori's right. Maybe Fitzgerald is going to turn on them. But we'll see. Or it could be like a double cross, right? Is he going to double cross? Or is he going to use the ADA for his own means? We'll see, right? We'll see how that goes. But I feel like Fitzgerald is not just going to instantly... like try to trick them, because if that were the case, he could have done that a long time ago, right? It's a really good narrative device that we have Tanizaki and Kinji following Yosano, because it's a really good narrative device, because at first Tanazaki's like, well, I'll just turn myself in because they could use my ability, and I'm like, that's real sweet, Tanizaki, but they don't want you. They want Yosano, right? And Yosano's like, well, since we're walking that way, I guess I'll tell you my horrific backstory. And they handle it rather well. There's only one moment where they both kind of look at each other like, you believe this shit? Like, there's only one moment of that. But they handle this gruesome, horrific backstory fairly well. But yeah, it's a nice narrative device to be like, okay, well, while we're going this way, let's talk about each other, right? And Tanizaki and Kinji's backstories seem pretty straightforward. But getting to know hers, oh my god. And the idea that she's just like, I know what he's trying to do. And she's like, a long time ago, the boss and Mori sensei were close allies in a tripartite framework. So, okay. So 14 years ago, go back here. We know from the timeline that 8 years ago was the dark era. 8 years ago was the dark era, right? And 12 years ago was when Chuya and Dazai met, and they were 15. So Dazai around this point, right? Dazai would have been 13, right? So, what do we have? 18 years ago, we had even 4 years back, right? Did we say like around 18 years ago? We'll say 17 to 18 years ago is when Fuku met Rampo, right? And I'm sure in the comments if I have any of this wrong, you all will correct me, but I'm just trying to go off memory of what's happened so far. Because it's been 3 years since Mori and Fuku have worked together. Or rather, I'm going to save that. But we know about 17 or 18 years ago, Fukuzawa met Rampo, right? And then 14 years ago, Dazai would have been, because Dazai was around 9 when that happened. So 4 years later, it would have been, he was 13, and Yosano was 11. And then 3 years, so this was 2 years later. So, okay. So then 3 years later, which was 11 years ago, is when Yosano joined the ADA. So she joined like a year after Dazai and Chuya met, but it was 3 years before Dazai left to join the ADA. So yeah, the timeline's starting to come together a little bit, right? And around this time, Mori split from Fukuzawa. And around this time, 11 years ago, was around the time that Mori killed, let me get this right, Mori killed the old boss, right? So Yosano would have been 14. Dazai would have been 16, right? Dazai would have been about 16 years old around that time. So that's around the time that Mori killed the old boss, right? Because Mori kept saying to Fukuzawa, he's like, I need her ability to fight the old boss. Like, he was wanting to take over the Port Mafia 11 years ago, and Fukuzawa was like, we're not using her. So we'll come back and add to this, but that's interesting. They're part of this framework, and that's the one that Natsumi set up, right? So this tripartite framework was the Port Mafia, the ADA, and the government, right? And this is what Natsumi had created, right? Excuse me. That's what he'd formed with them. So yeah, he's like, now they're enemies. No, they were together. They had some hot sex and they broke up. Basically, they had a difference of opinions, right? They were better in bed than in anywhere else. And so they're like, well, come to think of it, yeah, it all makes sense. And then I love her pulling the hairpin that she's kept all this way. I love to get backstory with the hairpin, the dream of butterflies. That's so good, right? And so near the end of the Great War. So we established that 14 years ago, there is this great war. This great war with Gifted, right? I can't remember if the Great War was going on around the time that Fukuzawa met Rampo. I think there was peace talks, and that was kind of like one of the reasons that he assassinated some of the people that were involved in treaties. So it could have been during that time, but this is the part where it's like escalating, right? It's near the climax of the Great War 14 years ago. Okay. Which conveniently coincides around the time that Chuya and Dazai meet up. So by that point, when Chuya and Dazai are together, that's towards the end of it, right? Interesting. Getting stuff put together. Okay. And if Chuya was kind of augmented and worked on, interesting. So like an island, Tokyo Yamajima, appeared out of nowhere. Just an island out of nowhere with a bunch of electromagnetic currents. Not a big deal. Not anything to write home about. Just a rando island appearing out of nowhere. No worries. So there's this random island that is Toko Yamajima. Interesting. Appeared out of nowhere in the Pacific. An unclaimed island where it was only ever night. Yeah, and it became the battleground towards the end of the Great War. Yeah, that's fascinating that it's this, endless, it's just eternal night. Okay. And there's all this like electromagnetic currents. Again, there's probably stuff in this episode that I'm going to go ahead and say, that I either should already know about from previous seasons or that will lead into stuff in the future. And I know you're sitting on your hands wanting to tell me what this stuff is all about, but please don't tell me. Let me figure it out for myself. And if I have to be in the dark until the show decides to reveal its secrets, that's fine. I'm okay with being in the dark for a little while. It'll be all right. But I don't want to know. So the Aurora destroyed electronic equipment. So basically they had to fight like World War I, World War II era. They couldn't use any advanced technology because of the electromagnetic waves. How convenient. It almost seems like the island was just kind of created as a social experiment, if I'm being honest. It seems like the island was just a giant social experiment to see what would happen and to test out gifted users and their abilities. Seems rather sketchy, if you ask me. But Yosano is there, and she's 11. She's like, my ability, thou shalt not die. The fact that she's 11 years old, the fact that she's that young, y'all, that's so sad and horrifying that she's just this little kid. She's just this little kid. And Mori, and using all of her abilities, and she uses it onto up to 80 people at once. That's terrifying. Terrifying that she can do that. And she manages to heal all of them. She's a sponsored student medic in the National Guard Infantry 356. Yosano Akiko, 11 years old. And so then we get also, so Mori currently is, Mori Ogai he's the medic adjutant, the chief. And he's 40 now, right? So is that, yeah, he's 40 years old now. Put that over here. Mori is 40. So he was 26 back then. And Mori looks rather young. Like, he's basically the same age as Dazai now, pretty much. So he's pretty young there. But he's just as intimidating and terrifying as he was, like, back then. And all of those guys, like, all the soldiers at first are like, oh, let us worship you. Because you healed us, you're an angel. And doing it once was fine, but Mori being like, leave my Yosano alone. It's so gross. And Mori saying, well, I could never do, anything to a little girl. It's like, bleh. Yeah, he's just so creepy, right? And now it makes the line, God, it makes that line that Fuka said, are you still lusting after little girls? Meaning, like, it makes it hit that much harder knowing that he worked with Yosano when she was this young. And then him saying line, are you still talking to cats? Like, are you still going after Natsumi? It makes that all, like, just even more, have more layers and depth to it, right? But him saying, I have the right to correct your attitude and language. Ugh, that's just, gugh. And she said she was working at a candy shop until the week before when he dragged her out. So yeah, Mori's specialty is just abducting children. He literally went to the candy store and abducted a little girl. Like, does she have a family? Did she have friends? You just took her away? But yeah, he basically just abducted Q. He abducted her. He took Dazai away, Chuya away. We don't know where Dazai came from, obviously. Don't want to know. Maybe we'll find out. But yeah, he just has this habit of just finding kids. And he's like a evil Willy Wonka. He just takes kids away from their homes, but he doesn't give them candy and doesn't let them go back, right? It's so weird. And so then she meets the one man that's reading the poetry book. I feel like we've seen him before. And I was racking my brain because at first, I think it's just because his eyes are golden and he has a distinct look. He doesn't look just like an extra, but he has almost like an Oda meets at sushi charm to him. He's like if Oda met at sushi sort of situation. But at first, when I first saw the golden eyes, all I could think of was like the one guy that worked for Fyodor's group, right? That was trying to kidnap Rampo. But then I immediately was like, no, his hair was different. So that doesn't work. But yeah, he just has a look like you've seen him before. And he has an ability. And he has an ability to turn things that he thinks of, I guess, into metal. It's a random ability, not much worth. And yeah, he opens up the little book and I guess thinks of her. And then when she catches it, it turns into something metal. And he calls her an angel. And of course, Mori's jealous. He's like, why does he get to call you an angel and doesn't get, like, berated, right? And he's like, it's not going to change the world like your ability can. So, yeah. So, I've wondered for a while why her ability, like, nobody makes as big of a deal about it. I guess because the ADA, she doesn't use it very often. It's very sparingly, right? But we have this concept of Yosano's ability being something that is powerful and world-changing. Which, yeah, as soon as Mori learned about it, I'm sure he was like, oh, need this. But the crazy thing about it is that it shows, like, the dark side of that in this episode. That why it's so wrong to try to change fate like that, right? Because there's a lot of tropes in anime and other stories that are about, like, abilities that make you immortal. And immortality is not always a good thing. And this series kind of explores this through her ability of how dangerous it is and how inhumane it is, right? Because the idea that immortality, and this has been told time and time again in many stories, that immortality robs humanity. That lives are no longer sacred. It sounds great at first, like, oh, I'm not going to die. That's awesome. But then under a regular circumstance where if you were just at home and she kept you from dying, that's one thing. But they keep getting sent out to the battlefield over and over and over again, and they still feel all that pain. They still know they haven't forgotten the experiences, right? So that sticks with them. And to see the process of this young man go from being this poet, this beautiful poem reading man, to being completely heartbroken to the point of suicide is dark and disturbing and heartbreaking. And she's 11 and has to see this, right? He said the great powers of Europe that started the gifted wars. So we need to write that down too. The great powers of Europe. So great powers of Europe that started the gifted wars. I mean, does that tie into the fact that the prison that Fyodor and Dazai are in is in Europe? Could that be connected to it? Possibly. Possibly there's some connection there that started the gifted wars. Are changing the very concept of war. If we prevail, we have to prove to the military brass as fast as possible. So the idea that gifted people can change the concept of war. I am sensing that we're going to get that this could tie into why Fyodor hates the gifted. I have a feeling this could tie into that if he's older than Dazai, who was, around 13 around the time this war was going on, if Fyodor was around 14 or 15, if Fyodor was a soldier in this war whose ability was used to kill others over and over again, could that tie into why Fyodor hates the concept of being a gifted? Because he sees how they're used? That would be a really cool layer to add to Fyodor's character, being like, I don't want there to be gifted because it's going to create never-ending war and we're just going to be used to cause mass destruction. So what's the point? I could see it. I could see that happening with his character and that being a reason. Right? And so, yeah. He's like, that's why Chief Mori brought you into the unit. And she's like, what? He says, isn't that right, Chief Mori? And then we go back to him, and he's like, oh, you've read my Immortal Regiment paper. So, yeah, so Mori's wrote this big write-up about how those with gifted could be using. That's a really cool foil that you have Mori, who is all about using gifts to the fullest extent, no matter what, and wants this Immortal Army with Yosano at the helm, versus a character like Fyodor, who wants to completely dismantle the idea of being gifted because he thinks it's a curse. I just get it all on all sides, right? And he says, Elise Chan, we need the next chart. I like that we didn't see Elise until this moment. And also, Elise looks older in this. She doesn't look like a little girl as much. She looks older, right? She looks older than Yosano, who's 11. So I have to wonder if Mori, the older Mori gets, the younger he makes Elise to kind of like balance it out. That's rather interesting. And she says, yes, master. That's interesting too, that she's like, that's fascinating. So,
background in the past, so we know Mori wants an Immortal Army. And he wants to use Yosano to keep it going. But with Elise, she was really obedient back 14 years ago. But now she's like almost restless. Right? I wonder, because she's his power. So I wonder if that is tied to Mori and his mental state. So back then he was very self-assured, confident in command and control, and was like, I have everything done. So she was following his orders, and now things are kind of erratic and he's not fully in control and is kind of like nervous or not sure or uncertain, and Elise kind of runs wild, kind of like his imagination running wild. It's fascinating, right? Or maybe when she's not in the middle of a battle, she's not, maybe he can't focus all that into her ability. So yeah, him getting blown up and then getting rescued by her. And she saved him. And she's like, I treated 80 people at once. The worst one had was half his body blown off. I'm like, that's the idea that she's like, I could heal his wounds, but I couldn't heal his mind. Yeah, a guy that like lost half his body was suddenly brought back. He mentally couldn't take it. And she's like, some of them just died. They just didn't make it. He couldn't even say his name. Like, that's absolutely terrifying. And this little 11-year-old girl, Yosano, is like, I don't know how to deal with this. And she says, angel my ass, I'm just healing them to have them die again. Yeah, it's just causing them more pain than anything, right? And he tries to tell her, he's like, no. He's like, the number of times you've saved my life, it makes the 5th time. And so I make the character true with it every time you've saved my life. I've tallied it to that. Every time I count something, I finish writing true. He's like, I get the sense that something just was created in the world. This is your justness. Like, you saved my life, and so that's just. You're making it to where I can go back home. Except they don't go back home. And that's where it gets, like, just so damn disturbing. Right? So he gives her hope, but he's like, we just stayed there getting brutalized. And a normal unit would have retreated. And she talks about that too. That the idea that retreat and loss is part of the human experience. Because yeah, loss teaches you things. When you lose, you learn why you lost. You reevaluate yourself, the situation, and you maybe think about ways to not lose again. And some of those ways don't result in a never-ending war, right? So she's like, sometimes it's good to lose because that leads to people making negotiations. It leads to treaties. It leads to wars stopping. But if you never lose and if you never retreat and you keep healing yourself over and over again, it's never ending. And you will just slowly deteriorate over time. And then what do, right? And so then, of course, and just the fishbowl effect has never been better in this series. The one time that damn fishbowl eye effect was needed and warranted is this episode with her being stuck in this never-ending battle, healing these guys that are dying over and over again. That is the best use of that effect in this entire series, bar none. And she's like, I don't want to go out anymore. And the guys don't want to go out anymore. It's absolute insanity. And the man that she's been helping is so dazed at this point. He's just calling out to his parents saying he wants to go home. And he's just like in a daze. And Mori's like, well, go ahead and heal him. And she's like, I don't want to anymore. She's like, I don't want to heal him anymore. Because he needs to go to a proper doctor and leave. She's like, these guys, if they had left now with the injuries they had, they would have been minor. And they could have gone home. But because they stayed here, they died. And she's like, I can't do it. And Mori is so cruel when he just shoots him. He's like, well, fine, heal him. And she does because she's that kind. It's heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking. And then he says, I'm obliged to give you orders. And he says, but I have a hard time saying no to a girl's wishes. But not yours.
that moment where he just like says, "You'll do it because I tell you to." Like at that point I was like, "Oh hell no, Mori. I'm out. I'm out." I've liked his character for the last 3 seasons, and everybody's been so kind in the comments, been like, yeah, sure. You like Mori? Cool. They have like little skull emojis. They're like, it's fine. And this season, I'm like, no, I get it. I get why people don't like him. I'm like, no, he's awful. I was like telling her to do it. Oh my God. And saying, you know of the samurai, don't you? Saying they failed to understand war by gun and cannon and they perished. So this is Mori's perspective. Mori's perspective is he's like over and over again, wars have broke out over and over again because one group realized the other group's power was stronger, and so they just keep trying to match it over and over again. So if one group gets stronger, the other group gets stronger than that. They're like, it just keeps going on and on, right? He's like, now special abilities are changing the war. He's like, your role is to make the military understand that change. So he's like, it almost seems like Mori wants to get to a point where this is the pinnacle. This is as far as we go. Like we started out with muskets and cannons, and then we moved to like guns and tanks and planes and bombs. He's like, this is as far as the evolution can go. This is the end point. And so we need to make them understand that we have powers that exceed their technology. And so I don't know if that's Mori's way of trying to make the wars stop by showing that there's nowhere, the ceiling has reached. You've reached the ceiling. There's nowhere else to go. I don't know if that's his intent or what the deal is, but God, he's like, otherwise the nation will fall. And she's like, no. She's like, I just want to save the lives in front of me, not keep killing these people over and over again. And God, Mori is so heartless. He's like, then just fine. This guy's dying. Are you going to save him or not? And God, it's so cruel. It's so cruel. And she says, the man that patted my sister and said I reminded him of his sister, the one who gave me coffee and everything, they're all gone. They've died. They could have gone home and I could have seen them again. But I can't do that. She's like, usually you say that a troop is annihilated when half the unit is incapacitated, not destroyed. And the only chess pieces left on the board are a pawn, a rook, and a king and queen. And she's like, that's not the case. And she said, I've robbed them of the power to lose. I've robbed them of their humanity. There's only one place that they can go. And then they tried to kill her because at that point they're like, they don't want to keep going out. So then they turn on her. What other choice do they have? Right? And then the soldier who gave her that pin, he didn't try to, it's like, the crazy thing is, was he the one that tried to kill her? No, he wasn't. It was somebody else. But the guy that gave her the pin, he called her an angel of death, and he said that he has his limits. He says you'd have sinned on the battlefield as an angel of death. Tell my family I said goodbye. Yeah, the moment she opened up that hatch, I'm like, he hung himself. But God, the thing, and this show, it getting people to hang themselves, oh my God, it's worse than Ace. And the moment that she looks down and sees the dog tag, and it has all of the scribbles, like was it 5 times? So it was 5 times per character. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 900, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 30. She brought him back over 150 times. And then he just stopped scribbling. He just scratched it out at that point. And then had the poetry book and said, "You are too just." And it's funny they had the poetry book because Thou Shalt Not Die is an anti-war poem. So, oh my God, yeah. It's very fitting that her ability and the poem being anti-war is tied to her backstory. I love that. I kind of love it a lot, right? I remember back when we first researched her ability for the show, and I was like, oh, an anti-war poem, that's kind of cool. I'd forgotten about that, and then I went back and looked and was like, yeah, it was an anti-war statement. I wonder if we'll come back to that.
Yep, we did. I'm glad y'all didn't spoil it. I'm glad y'all were sitting there like, we'll tie back to that later. It was great. But God. And then she's like, my memory after that point is vague, but she tried to blow up the carrier. And I like that at this point, Tanizaki and Kenji look at each other like, oh, okay. And then, yeah, she gets put into a padded room after the war, kept in isolation. And the one that came to get her was Mori. He found her, and he's a doctor at this point. So it had been 3 years later. The animation of her eyes moving so quickly, like that animation of her eyes just twitching over, is the most disturbing thing. It is so freaking disturbing for her eyes just being like just moving so quickly, like inhumanly quick, how she just sees him again. And so it's been 3 years. So at this point he's 29. And already his hair's grown out. His eyes have more bags under them. He's met Dazai at this point. He's had the clinic. He's been working underground. Yeah, like Mori has been shifting into who he is now. And saying that he needs her ability. And then as he's taking her away, Fukuzawa shows up. Right? With his scarf and everything. And the sword. And then there's Elise. And Elise's hair is all down at this point. Like it's crazy. She still has the medic outfit on. His ability. Elise still has the medic outfit on. And he still has the scalpels. And only her hair is down instead of up in the pigtails. Yeah. He says you would drag her back into hell again. Are you playing the part of a devil, Mori-sensei? And he says she's the pillar of the city's peace. Trying to use the city there. An immortal army led by Yosano-kun is best suited for defeating the formidable Port Mafia boss. Yeah, so he was trying to defeat the Mafia boss and take over the Mafia at that time, right? To take over. He was basically trying to enact Natsume's plan of having him be the pillar of the Port Mafia, right? To protect the city. And he's like, well, we need Yosano to have the Immortal Army to take down the Port Mafia leader so I can take over. So that's why I need her. Kind of, he was using her similarly to how Fitzgerald wants to use her, only instead of one person, it's an army. And Fukuzawa was like, no! He's saying, and I love that Fukuzawa, goes after him, saying, best suited my ass. Your reasoning lacks humanity. And that's their fundamental difference, is that Fukuzawa from knowing Rampo and from being away from his old ways has gained back his humanity. And Mori's like, well, humanity. He says, war is a game in which the first to take humanity into account loses. Which is kind of funny, because we talked about Fyodor versus Dazai at the beginning of this reaction, and it makes me wonder, Mori's logic kind of aligns itself with Fyodor's. Fyodor's like, oh, well, Fyodor is under this false pretense that he's helping humanity by ridding the gifted, and he's helping the gifted by ridding them of their gift by killing them. But at the same token, I think Fyodor would agree that humanity is not needed in war, and Mori kind of believes that as well. But Dazai, I feel, because of Otosaku, kind of takes humanity a little more into account than he lets on, right? And Fukuzawa definitely takes into account. And God, the fact that he fires the scalpels as Elise has him held back. He's like, then our alliance ends today. And he's like, in fact, your life ends today. And then it's like, get a room, you two. But yeah, so their alliance quit because he was trying to take Yosano back. And yeah, so these two quit their alliance because of Yosano. Imagine that. And then we see Rampo. And Rampo, I almost didn't recognize him because he doesn't have the coat or anything on. He's in just a plain white shirt. Right? He says, grown-up fights are always so pompous. I love that Rampo's just kind of like, oh, they're just fighting. They'll be fine. They'll make up later. But that's amazing that the straw that broke Fukuzawa away from Mori was Yosano. So, of course, I'm like, why? So, of course, Yosano was like, why would Fuku say that he'd take me over? He, literally laid down life and limb to keep me from Mori. So it's like, girl, you should not believe anything Mori says. He's lying, obviously. That lie makes it just that much more apparent. And he says, oh, this. I'm freeing you while the boss is fighting. I like while those two were fighting and having this helicopter fight, Rampo just like wheeled her away like, okay, bye. I just love that he came and got her while they were fighting. He's like, that's the plan. And so he's getting her out of there. They're making their escape while they're fighting. I like that they slowly make their escape, right? And he's like, well, why would I take you back? And she says, I can't go outside. My special ability makes it too easy to save lives. And I make the lives of everyone around me seem cheap. I can't be allowed to live. Like, she's just so hard. Like, she looks like Kyoka in that moment, honestly. And what's crazy is that it's like Kyoka went through that whole thing where she was horrified at the prospect of taking so many lives. And here Yosano is ironically saving so many lives, right? And at that point, Rampo's like, I don't care about your ability. He's like, no. He's like, just quit using it. He's like, we're not taking you away because we want to use your ability. We care about your kindness. That's what we care about. Because he's like, at the end of the day, Rampo's like, my ability is the only one that matters. We just like you because of your personality. That's all. And I love these, like, my superhuman deduction is the best special ability in the world. No other ability matters, which is the best irony because it's not an ability. I love it. I love that the moral of the story is the character that has the best ability, that's not an ability, is the crux of it all. The crux of this entire agency. He's like, with me on your side, I can solve all your problems. It's so cute. He's like, if you doubt it, I can prove it to you. And then he gives, and I love that he does the little magic trick with this hand. He does a magic trick to make the butterfly pin appear. So he found it in the carrier and was able to deduce whose it was. Again, I would not have such a heartfelt appreciation of this scene if we hadn't seen that flashback with Rampo at the beginning of the season. It's so perfectly laid out. I'm just like, mwah, mwah. This season just connects it so perfectly, right? It feels so needed. And now the idea, God, back from season 2, now the idea that Yosano had to tell Rampo being like, you have this ability. He's like, what, did the Fukuzawa lie to me? Like, their whole interaction from season 2 is just that much more layered. Oh my gosh, just, slay me, Bungo Stray Dogs. He says, I know everything. He says, ask me a question. She's like, what should I do now? The people I cared about died because of me. He's like, that's how it's always going to be. There'll be people who want to use my ability against my will. And then he's like, that's not why we're taking you. He's like, there's one place the world doesn't need you, and that's the agency. Oh. And then at that point about the seeds, he says, you don't want anybody to die, right? That's why you're in so much pain. And he's like, I want to invite you because you have kindness. I don't care about your ability. And I love that he, like at this point, Rampo is probably 16 or 17. Like he's older. You can tell like how much taller he's gotten, right? He's this tall little gangly string bean. And he's like, your kindness means something, not your ability. And he's so sweet. I'm like, where? I would not have imagined Rampo being this sweet, like back in seasons 1 through 3, that little troll. But here he's such a sweetheart. Oh my gosh. And I'm just like, and her crying onto the butterfly. And then she thinks back to that memory. I don't ship Rampo and Yosano romantically, but they are like brother and sister. They're like their bond of BFFs. If it wasn't for Edgar Allan Poe, I'd be like, oh, they're BFFs, but Edgar Allan Poe's his BFF. But I'm just like, their bond is so beautiful, and I freaking love it so much. And then she chooses to go out and open the door and walk out for this damn transaction. Oh my god, it's so damn good. This episode was amazing and I loved it. So yeah, we got lore about the war, got lore about the concepts of war being connected to the gifted and changing, how Yosano's ability is just absolutely heartbreaking and it being used to the brink by Mori. Definitely understand the resentment. I get that now. We got more with the timeline. Is Fitzgerald going to double cross? I don't know. I think he's going to, in the end, be favoring Atsushi in the ADA, but I don't know. One thing's for sure, we have 4 episodes left. We're still setting up for season 5. I'm so convinced. We've barely gotten into the hunting dogs at all. But I feel like maybe we will have a battle with the one Fukuchi and Akutagawa and Atsushi by the last episode. I feel like we will. But I have a feeling he's going to get away from the battle, and that's going to be leading into season 5. We'll see. But man, the animation, the emotion, the themes, everything about this episode was great. It was wonderful, and my heart goes out to Yosano. Best girl. I can hear Annie Leonhardt a little bit in this episode, which was really nice. So there's that too, but I am sniffly, but very satisfied. Sniffly, but satisfied. Sniffly, but satisfied. So I'm gonna go take some medicine, edit this video to get it up for Saturday. But I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed this reaction discussion, but y'all, this episode was great. So I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 10 of Bungo Stray Dogs. Bye.